Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome back to the I Have the Right to Aspire podcast. I'm Katie, and I'm here with my co-host, Chessy. Aspire was created by the nonprofit I Have the Right To, which Chessy co-founded and where I serve as the executive director, as a space for honest, meaningful conversations about survivor advocacy, prevention, and what it truly takes to create safer communities. This podcast is about learning together, leaning into courage, and uplifting the voices of people who show up every day to drive real, lasting change. Before we jump into our conversation with today's guest, Laura Dunn, we want to take a moment to introduce two of our I Have the Right To student interns who will be joining us as co-hosts for this episode. Chessy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Jonas and Kyleigh.
Hi, everybody. First, we want to introduce Jonas Wahl. Jonas is a student at the University of Delaware, and he decided to intern with I Have the Right To because he's passionate about making sure students understand their rights and feel supported if they experience sexual assault. What drew him to this work is our focus on education and conversation, not just responding after harm occurs. Welcome, Jonas. We're also joined by Kyleigh LeBoutillier, a student at the College of Charleston. Kyleigh came to I Have the Right To with a strong passion for advocacy and community support, and she hopes to extend that same care and guidance to students and communities beyond her campus. Welcome, Kyleigh. We're so excited to have both Jonas and Kyleigh as part of the Aspire team and to bring their voices into these conversations. And now I'm going to pass it over to Katie to introduce today's incredible, inspiring, lovely guest, Laura Dunn.
Thanks, Chessy, and welcome again, Jonas and Kyleigh. We're honored to be joined today by Laura Dunn, a nationally recognized attorney, survivor advocate, and leader in the fight for victims' rights. Over the years, Laura has represented and advocated for survivors of sexual violence, helping shape policies and legal strategies that center survivors and hold institutions accountable. Today, she's taking that work even further as she runs for Congress, bringing her lived experience, legal expertise, and unwavering commitment to justice into the public arena. This is going to be a powerful conversation about advocacy, the law, and what it really means to turn survivor-led work into systemic change. Let's dive in. Laura, we're so happy to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a true honor. I obviously know Chessy Prout from my work and was there in the courtroom as she bravely testified. And so it's so beautiful to be here seeing her as a national leader. She always was one, and was brought to the national stage, unfortunately, through tough circumstances. But it was my honor to sit with her and her family through that process and to advocate. And it's an honor now to be here and to share about my work and hopefully inspire further people to lead.
I cry at some point in every single episode that we tape for this podcast, and I never cried this early on. So thank you, Laura, for that welcoming introduction to us too.
Yes, that's beautiful, and so beautiful to bring the two of you back together for this important conversation. Laura, I'd love for our listeners to learn a bit more about your work and background. Can you share what first inspired you to become an attorney and advocate for survivors of sexual violence?
Absolutely. So, like so many millennials, I grew up watching Law and Order SVU, and I had a dream of being a prosecutor. And I had a vision of the way the world worked. And when I went to college and experienced campus sexual violence for myself, I realized that vision was false. I faced a system that wasn't interested in what I had to say, had no interest in seriously investigating what happened to me, and was more content to sweep it under the rug. So from that life experience, I realized I can't stand with a system of oppression. Unfortunately, the criminal system largely embodies that for many people in our community. And I decided to explore what it would mean to represent victims directly. Prior to doing that, I briefly worked in the Milwaukee Public Defender's Office, and I did that on purpose. I wanted to work with offenders and to understand the other side. It was a very eye opening experience because I realized almost every single offender had themselves been victimized as a child, failed by our system, and then turned around and used the violence used on them against others. So I really decided in this field of justice to stand with survivors come hell or high water. I've done that in Congress, doing legislative and policy work. I've done that in courtrooms, bringing civil cases against institutions and perpetrators. I've even had the pleasure of doing it as a criminal defense attorney, representing survivors who reported offenses and then found themselves being prosecuted for allegedly making false reports, even though it was very clear that the reports were real. And those were successful cases resolved in their favor. But no matter the framework, the theme is the same. I stand with survivors because I myself am one, and I know how important the fight is to change institutions to be about justice.
In all of that experience that you've had working with survivors, working with people who have done the harm, who are also survivors in their own way of the traumas that lead them to commit the harm, is there a specific experience or a moment early on in your career that shaped the way that you approach survivor advocacy? You know, by the time that I met you in, was it the trial was in 2015? I mean, you obviously were a seasoned pro. You were there to support me and my family as our kind of spokesperson. You helped protect me from the press, protect me from the harm that come to survivors who come forward publicly. So yeah, if you could share what shaped your approach to that kind of survivor advocacy, that would be really valuable for us and our listeners to hear.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I had experience with two male sexual assault survivors very, very early on. So, my boyfriend at the time in college had himself been victimized as a child by a teenage neighbor and was kind of put into a situation where he felt silenced and shamed and had never really spoken about it. So, he supported me coming out publicly as a survivor, supporting another survivor. And interestingly enough, one of the two offenders I knew was also a survivor of child sexual abuse because I was friends with his girlfriend, and she had told me before this incident that his uncle had abused him. And at one point, he confronted me, was very upset. I reported to law enforcement, and is literally, I was in a fraternity. He was punching the walls on either side of my head, being like, "Take it back," and trying to intimidate me. And in that moment, I had such clarity. I just looked him in the eyes and I said, "I'm doing this for you as much as I'm doing it for me." And he had no idea what to do with that, and it gave enough time for someone to grab him away, and avoid that situation escalating. But the reason I bring up these examples is survivors handle their pain in different ways. And we often want to make survivors be painted in one picture. It's the perfect innocent female victim and the violent, brutal male offender. And some people will put even racial dynamics or other factors onto that, but it happens in a variety of situations. A vast majority of my clients have been same sex individual situations, whether they were in partnerships, whether it was a hazing. Um, and so I think being able to understand that victimization doesn't look one way helps me really be open and more compassionate, even to the side that's oppressing, because so often they have a history. Almost every K through 12 case that I've litigated, the offender has a history of being victimized themselves. And unfortunately, they're very often serial offenders. And so I really believe that if we look at it from a systems approach, that we need to intervene when people are harmed, lead them from square one, make pathways to support them, we can stop offending, and to never assume that any survivor is one way, and to try to reach them where they're at and bring them along to the side of justice.
You've spent over 2 decades holding powerful institutions accountable as a civil and victim rights attorney, and have now decided to run for Congress in New York. Can you share a bit about this journey and what ultimately led you to decide to run for Congress?
I love the question. I did not start my life thinking I'd ever run for office. I've definitely had people say it along the way. And when it became real for me was actually when realizing Title IX is effectively dead in the United States. So advocates have not really talked about this publicly because it's a little complicated and there's not a sexy way to do it. So I will do my best today. When Trump first took office, he redid the Title IX rules that all colleges follow for how to handle sexual violence. And he redid them to favor those accused and even those who have, in fact, been found to perpetrate over those who are victimized. So that was already kind of narrowing one pathway of justice I've utilized a lot to assist clients. On top of that, in his second term, he's obviously crippled the U.S. Department of Education. If it was up to him, it wouldn't exist at all. But since he can't get rid of it easily or legally, he has just crippled the civil rights attorneys, firing them, removing them, putting them on other kind of cases, more going after trans athletes rather than protecting sexual assault survivors. So that administrative path of justice, Title IX complaints, Title IX proceedings on campus has pretty much been shifted dramatically against survivors. The other thing that we have not talked about successfully in the advocacy community is a Supreme Court case that happened in April 2022. It's called Cumming versus Premier Rehabilitation Center. It's not a Title IX case, but when you read it, the Supreme Court does something very devious that all civil rights attorneys caught, but the public missed. It basically reinterpreted a constitutional power, the spending clause, where the government gives money to a school and in exchange the school complies with civil rights laws. It reinterpreted it to no longer award what we call emotional distress damages. So what that really means is when a survivor is targeted, pushed out, discriminated against, and abused, the court is no longer going to award all the money that would go to the distress of that situation. They're only going to look for tangible damages. Did you drop out of college? How much was your tuition? Did you have to pay for an attorney? What was that cost? And while some college survivors still have those types of damages, K through 12 survivors kind of don't. So a lot of them are at public schools. They're mandated to be there and they can't drop out of school and their family can't afford private school tuition. So what the Supreme Court has effectively done is take cases that on average settled for $350,000, sometimes over millions, but that was the average. And now the value for K through 12 is maybe $10,000. So if I'm a lawyer and I'm running a for-profit company bringing litigation, do I want to spend $100,000 plus to win $10,000 for a client? Probably not. Economically, it makes no sense. So the Supreme Court kind of very subtly killed private enforcement of Title IX. And while people can go to nonprofits and bring litigation through that, there's only so many nonprofits. They only have so many staff and so much budget. They cannot meet the demand that is here. So it's a very subtle way to kill Title IX. So I was realizing this, running a national Title IX practice, and I made a decision once I saw where the trend was going to sell my practice while it still had value and to start looking for that opportunity to fix Title IX directly. I want to be the Congress member that fixes Title IX, that keeps it for the next 50 years. Because we've had it for 50 years. It's put women on the Supreme Court. It's put women in Congress. It's an essential law. But if we don't change it, if we don't fix this issue, we're not going to have it for the next 50 years.
It's amazing to hear you talk about this case because I feel like so often a lot of these legal actions that will affect, the people in the general public are not accessible enough for us to really understand what these rulings actually mean for our everyday lives and what they could mean for us if we experience these kinds of things in the future. We talk a lot about institutional failure as an organization, and through my story, I experienced a lot of institutional failure. But there are so many ways that, and this case that you just presented us is a perfect example of it, that the government is set up to fail us in ways that it can be are obviously quite obvious, and then there are other ways that are more subtle. And so, you said before that not all survivors are there is no such thing as a perfect survivor. And just because you're a survivor doesn't mean that you're inherently, want the best for the world or, there's no such thing as, and I'm saying this so poorly, but the world is not black and white. It is so gray. And yet, once you've experienced the harm of a sexual assault, it does kind of give you an insight into how the world works that can be used for good. And it's exciting to see you use this for good. So how does your identity as a survivor impact the way that you will be approaching or would approach these sort of more subtle institutional failures that happen at the government level?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. So, the first thing I think being a survivor has really cultivated me is being fearless. And I know you, Chessy, are also fearless. When your back is against the wall, when there is no other choice, and you have made the brave decision to stand up rather than be silent, you have to go all in. There is nothing you can hold back. There is nothing left that is yours. It must all be poured out for the sake of justice and, bluntly, always for the sake of other people's justice by you leading by example. So I have that courage in me. It is now part of my DNA, and it's unfortunate it had to come through something so painful, but that is how I've been forged in fire. That's how I've been battle tested. So when we see all these horrors in the news, what ICE agents are doing, because they're not just abusing people in the street, they're sexually assaulting them in detention centers, I know that I can stand against forces of evil like that. And when it comes to the more subtle things, I mean, I really attribute that maybe to being a lawyer more than being a survivor. We're taught to look at the very little detail that everyone misses. There's an entire Supreme Court case that was fought over a comma. I mean, only lawyers care at that level. But it's important because if you don't see the subtle and only focus on the obvious, which is a lot of what the current Trump administration is doing, it's getting out alarming things while doing very subtle things. Um, then you don't realize that the bedrock is kind of being destroyed, the foundation is being lost. So I am glad I did a law degree. It was not easy on top of everything else because I was advocating actively during law school on Capitol Hill for legislative protections and was already helping survivors file Title IX complaints. But the work is vast, and I think survivors clue in a way that people maybe look past.
You've worked at high levels of policy before. You have advised the Senate Judiciary Committee. You've worked at the White House and also shaping the Violence Against Women Act. So, from these experiences, what are the biggest gaps in how lawmakers support survivors and marginalized communities? And what could be done differently?
This question. So I have always really hated that members of Congress in particular keep trusting institutions to do the right thing. It's like, how many times can we have the same discussion? Schools are not going to do the right thing inherently. They're not people, right? They don't have moral centers. They're composed of several different people with different agendas, and businesses ultimately serve their bottom line, which is why lawsuits are effective. We hit them in the wallet. So as a legislator, something I would want to change is to no longer rely on schools to self-regulate, to make sure that any protections we're putting in place for survivors really can be advanced, protected, safeguarded by external entities. So you mentioned some of my previous experience when I was on a federal rulemaking committee during law school. There was a huge fight over the right to have an advisor on campus. And it was a consensus process, which means all 50 experts in the room had to agree. And thankfully, I was nominated while still a student to be one of those experts by the survivor community. And the general counsel for schools said, this should be an advocate that's from the school system. It's a private system. We need to use our own. There's laws of privacy, and just was really advocating for that. And I said, over my dead body, this is going to be attorneys from the outside who are going to hold you to the standards of the law because you have proven time and time again that you will not uphold the law. And everyone else had to decide. We had to move every single person in the room between these polar points. And I remember a victim advocate came up to me and said, Laura, I really want to vote for you, But I'm afraid. I'm afraid that there's a ton of criminal defense attorneys. So all the accused will have attorneys, and I don't think there's any victims' rights attorneys. So I like the idea of this, right? But who's actually going to enforce it if we do that? Who's going to help survivors? And I said, make the right first and the market will adjust second. And actually, she inspired me to found a national nonprofit and become that lawyer in those hearings. And through that position, I trained tons of other victim advocates, tons of other attorneys. Now, almost every legal aid organization has a Title IX trained attorney. So there's attorneys all over the country that do victims' rights. So, that experience has really shown me that we have to be in those rooms. Our voices really matter, because if we're not, the same cycles keep happening, the same errors keep being made. And some of that's a lack of institutional knowledge. Some of it's honestly just a disconnection. You mentioned marginalized communities. People in Congress either aren't survivors, don't talk to survivors, or if they are survivors, bluntly have hidden that most of their life and haven't leaned into that part of the identity. That's changing a lot with more women coming into Congress. Even if women themselves have been victimized, they're aware of their friends being victimized, because we know sexual violence affects women more so than any other population except for transgender. Transgender individuals suffer the most. So marginalized communities really need to make their voices seen and heard on Capitol Hill. I remember when I moved there, I was literally amazed that I could just make an appointment and get into a Senate office. I never knew that that was possible. And I think people had this idea that Congress is over there and I'm over here. How could I possibly get there? You can fly to DC and you can make an appointment. You can sit in the lobby. You can do a lot of things. There's even an app where you can get the emails of, chiefs of staff. So people who are from marginalized communities, it's hard to carry the weight of your community, but if you feel called to do so, make your voice and presence known to these members of Congress, because unfortunately, as you all know, Congress tends to be the same person. It's the rich, it's the wealthy, it's the elite, it's the legacy. People like me don't tend to run for office, but I'm hoping that's changing, especially with the younger generation.
Survivor advocacy is such a central part of your work. How has your own lived experiences and legal expertise shaped the way you approach issues like campus safety, gender-based violence, and victim support?
Yeah, that's such a big question. A lot of times in law and other kind of serious fields, people talk about logic. Don't be emotional, just have logic. And I have always found that to be hilarious, because logic is so devoid of emotion that it makes errors because of it. And so I have always found that I hold deep, passionate emotions right alongside the logic, and that is actually the driving force of my advocacy. I have never felt like any day was a day of work, because I get to wake up and fight for what's right. I mean, that's a blessing. That's not something to grumble about over coffee. I don't need coffee. I'm at the desk being like, let's go. Let's take this institution down. Let's get this justice today. So I'm someone who's fueled by my emotions, my passion. And, you do need discipline, because it can overwhelm the senses. I'm thinking of one of those criminal defense cases. I was in the courtroom getting ready to do a closing argument, and the lead counsel started crying because she was a survivor, and it was painful for her to be there thinking a survivor was about to go to jail. My client, the survivor, was crying because she was terrified that she would be going to prison if I didn't win. The journalist who was following us for a documentary started crying because she herself is also a survivor. And some part of me is like, I want to cry too. But the part that has been trained to be a lawyer, to be a litigator, to be a representative, and not myself in those moments, but called to be a higher sense of justice, clicked in and said, I have to do this. And you better believe I not only nailed that closing, the next day I did cry almost the entire day, because it's so painful to live in a world that doubts survivors and recreates harm on top of harm. So I have worked very hard to balance that passion with the logic, with the skill sets. And I really wish more traditional training invited people to embrace their passions, their hearts, because there is something inherent in all of us that knows truth, even when logic isn't clear. And I think that is the part we're all called to follow in our work, in our missions, in our advocacy.
How have your personal experiences and years as a victim rights attorney shaped other policy priorities you're advocating for?
Yeah, so my platform is accountability for the government, first and foremost, affordability for the people so they can engage civically, and then advancement regarding technology and society. So accountability has to come first. Trust me, my entire team has been like, put affordability first. And I'm like, no, accountability, because people no longer believe in the government and with good reason. So we need to put congressional term limits of 12 years. People shouldn't be there like Representative Jerry Nadler for 34 years. He's done great work, but that is too long. People do age out, and it is important to facilitate the next generation of leadership. And that's something I will commit to doing should I win office. I will not be there decades. I will do my work, move on, and bring the next generation up. I also want to put ethical standards on the Supreme Court. I, as a lawyer, have that at all other levels of court. Why shouldn't the top of my profession have the same standards? And I want to end insider trading. Congress members are basically insider trading. They know which laws are going to pass, they know when they're going to pass, and they know which companies have lobbied for them. So they make bets and they make millions while you and I try to figure out how we're going to cover rent next month. So that needs to end because that's really detaching them from their duty to the people. Affordability was mentioned. When people are afraid about food on the table, paying that medical bill, getting gas in their car to make it to work, affording a place to live, they can't civically engage. They can't be paying attention to the news because they're so afraid, they're so worried. So we immediately need to re-support the middle class because the middle class is starting to die in America. So universal health care, starting with catastrophic coverage and then working forward from there, is part of my plan. Simplifying and equalizing the tax system. You and I who make incomes, we get taxed. People with wealth who just trade stocks and have other ways to hide their assets, they're not paying on top of that wealth. So we need to rethink the tax code. It serves only the wealthy and not the working class. And affordable housing that is also accessible for people with disabilities, for seniors. We have really gotten to a place where housing is an investment for people rather than a necessity. And so private equity is buying into that, driving up house prices in various neighborhoods. And there's other factors at play there, but it's a huge issue. People need to have safe dwellings. And last but not least, advancements in technology. So you all are the younger generation. You're cooler than me. You know what's next. I've been learning about crypto and blockchain, and I made it a big staple of my campaign. I'm a crypto candidate. And the reason I did so is what I realized, this is democratizing wealth. It's democratizing asset management. It's moving it away from government that can be abusive and oppressive and putting it directly in the hands of people and forcing us to work cooperatively in communities. That's a really beautiful technology, and yet it hasn't been sufficiently regulated to protect people against things like meme coin scams as pulled off by Trump and Eric Adams. Quantum computing is coming on the front line. It's going to change everything, our encryption systems, the way we power our computers, how fast they can solve problems, including breaking encryption that we rely on for security in society. So we need to be investing and researching that area. And last but not least, we all know about AI. AI is causing so many problems, whether it's encouraging children to commit suicide or harassing women through development of photos and images of them in various states of undress or sexual activity without their consent or knowledge. It's becoming a huge problem. And we have far too long given big tech free rein to do whatever they like and let consumers pay the price. And Congress is behind. So having younger leadership like me who can come in, know that these problems are there and bring my civil rights lens to it will find the balance between allowing the necessary innovation without the cost on the people.
A lot of survivor advocacy legislation looks strong on paper but falls short in practice.
Oh, absolutely.
How can we ensure that survivor centered laws are implemented and enforced, not just passed?
I love that question. So part of survivor-centered advocacy is removing protections for offenders, right? I think people feel very comfortable putting survivor-centered legislation forward, such as access to rape kits and different topics. But you're right, almost all those laws are not enforceable. So Amanda Yen is someone I really admire. She's a fellow TED fellow. She passed a law that would prohibit rape kits from being destroyed. But it's not enough just to say this will not happen. You have to have who's accountable. So the Department of Justice does have an office for victims of crime. But I'm sure you can guess right now it's completely dysfunctional, right? It has no authority. And even before it was limited, it didn't have enough oversight. A lot of times they would only get involved if there was systemic patterns of abuses. And that requires numerous people to report, which means numerous people would have to know about the system. So one of my criticisms of government is we pass a lot of laws, but we don't let anyone know we've done it. So there needs to be campaigns rolled out. So I would, of course, reinvigorate the Department of Justice and their Office for Victims of Crimes. And I would give them more funding so that they actually have enough agents to do this level of work. And I would try to encourage them to work with local advocacy organizations to create awareness about these complaints so that we can get that information necessary to investigate. And a lot of times when there's a complaint process, it becomes hyper technical. Did people plead the right thing, say the right thing? The Department of Education is a pretty good model of if there's enough there, they can on their own open an investigation rather than rely on the quality of the complaint. So having more enforcement models that allow people to kind of report in and for us to carry the government to carry the heavy burden of the legwork and seeing what's there is one way to do it. I'm very passionate about rape kit access. As I mentioned, Amanda worked on not letting those kits be destroyed, which has been an issue. I think that's been common. I remember in Wisconsin, rape kits were destroyed after 5 years, but the statute of limitations was 6, which makes no sense, right? So rape kit destruction should be prohibited. Rape kit testing should be mandated. There was a huge project in Michigan to mandate testing of all the kits that just sat in storage. And lo and behold, they found numerous serial offenders just by taking that extra step. Right now, we rely on survivors to carry that weight, but it makes no sense. We, the government, should carry that weight. And even on the front end, accessing a rape kits are almost never on college. They're not in university health systems, even though colleges have such a high rate of sexual violence. Even within a community, I always use DC as an example. There are 6 hospitals in DC. Only one gives rape kits. And it's not one that's accessible by public transportation. It's the farthest, hardest to get to one. And so the vast majority of survivors go to their local hospital, sit and wait for hours, are brought back and only then told, sorry, you can't get a rape kit. And for those who don't know, you're sitting in what happened to you. You cannot shower, you cannot go to the bathroom, you're not supposed to eat, you're not supposed to drink, you're just supposed to let it stick on your body and you're supposed to wait, which is horrible. That's a horrible requirement in any survivor. So to wait for hours and then be told it's not here, a lot of survivors say, just give me care, and they destroy the evidence. So I think every single ER across the United States should have a rape kit. There are people from our own community that are going to fight me on it, but they're going to fight me for the wrong reason. They're going to fight me because there's not enough sexual assault nurses. Well, why don't we mandate every nurse to be a sexual assault trained nurse? There's solutions to all these problems if we think big enough. So there needs to be better legislation. The government has largely done that through funding the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization. That's the law I've worked on previously. And I think we can keep doing that. But one thing I would caution is sometimes people get over-reliant on federal funding. So when I ran a national nonprofit, we did not take federal funding, which gave me total freedom to go after the government just as much as anyone else. If you took the federal money, you were limited. You couldn't go after states. You couldn't do defense work. You definitely couldn't criticize the government that gave you money, and you would get a phone call if you did. I tell you that. So we need to create programs that I think empower organizations to have seed money to get started, but also to think critically about how to be financially independent so that they can be advocates for survivors and not silent in the face of government failure.
And quickly going back, I love how you touched on AI with deep fakes and everything else going on nowadays. It's simply out of control. So, what role do you think Congress should play in terms of regulating AI to protect survivors of sexual violence, but also still preserving free expression and also innovation?
Absolutely. It's a great question. I've been working on it and I'm always open to better ideas. So I'll give you mine and you can give me yours if you got them. So the first is a lot of times what we do in this country is we just allow companies to open technology to the public and we see what happens. And what's nice about that is it encourages innovation. We do bring kind of tech leaders from all over the world here because they have that freedom, but the negative is the consequence paid by the consumer. So there's this concept of sandboxes. We can give people limited arenas to practice in. People could opt in to using these technologies, be compensated for their time, and therefore they're assuming some level of risk by using these unknown resources. And then we can see what happens when we let it loose to a smaller population and make adjustments as needed. There definitely needs to be partnerships between tech leaders and government officials so that we're on the front line. A lot of tech leaders actually are very interested in positive regulation because it helps them distinguish themselves from bad actors, because there are people that are just there to create technology that's a nuisance and a harm. And a lot of them really do want to build empires that people rely on and make kind of a central part of their lives. And so they're actually the allies that we need, and we need to talk with them and hear what they're saying. So I think we need sandboxes for AI. We also need liability insurance coverage. So if you're going into the space and you're putting a product into the world, you have to have a certain amount of financial coverage for harm. And something that I'm really upset about that relates to victims' rights and ties to big tech is Section 230 of the Communications Act, which basically says, these big tech platforms, whether it's Meta or Instagram, they can publish anything from anyone at any time and face no liability, and that includes child sex abuse images. A lot of people think that there was a law passed that actually stops that. It didn't. That's how powerful big tech is, and big tech has a lot of money and a lot of campaigns funding a lot of candidates to look the other way. So we need pathways to liability, the financial coverage when it does, but also safe sandboxes where people opt in knowing that there may be some level of risk, but there's also a reward. They will be compensated for their engagement. And my belief that may differ from some people in the space is, and it relates to me being an executive MBA student at NYU Stern, I do believe that markets need to self-regulate and that government is there for guardrails. So I don't think we need to over-control and over-regulate. And I know that when government has been afraid of new technologies, sometimes you put too many controls on it, and all it does is push it overseas, push it out of our states, and that's not good either. We want to be the leaders in it. So we just need to create those safe sandboxes and the opportunities while making sure that people aren't victimized.
Yes, I completely agree. And so now moving forward, with young people are also becoming increasingly civically engaged, but they still distrust these political systems you're talking about. So, what would you say to students and other young advocates who want to create change but still feel held back by how the system currently operates?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I don't actually like the Democratic Party despite running as a Democrat. They're the one most aligned with my values, but I have several criticisms. And I will say as a non-establishment candidate, people have said right to my face, you shouldn't be running, you have no business being here. And so one, don't listen to the noise, like come in with healthy skepticism, come in with criticism, but you do have to use coalitions and allyship. That's how all work gets done at this level. So you have to figure out what can I live with and what is a no-go. So for me, hate is a no-go. I cannot align with the Republican Party, who at this time is inviting misogynists and white supremacists to sit amongst their members. If I could be an independent, I would, but if anyone wants to run for office, you'll find out very quickly it's really hard to get the resources that you need to run. So if someone really wants to make a third party, I'm with you. I will help in any way I can. I think we need it in this country. But for now, you're going to have to pick a party, pick a poison, and then, do what I do as an attorney every day. The legal system is broken, so why do I serve it? Because I know how to bend it towards justice. That is my job. So when I go into Democratic clubs that really wish I wasn't running to make it easier for their pre-chosen candidate, I just show them exactly who I am, and I stand for the values that are at our core, and it moves the right people. So you can be discouraged, but if you give up then you're no different than the people who stay silent, in my opinion. And that may be a harsh statement, but I mean it. We have to find a way. And if it's not the systems that exist, then make a new system or figure out how to make the systems that exist work for you and for your betterment. We have a critical mass of the younger generation. They literally helped to get Mayor Mamdani elected in New York City and came out in droves. So that kind of engagement, I think, should encourage people that if you really believe, if you really decide, you have way more power than anyone has ever told you you have.
Yes, and adding on to that, what's one thing you wish more young people would understand about their rights and how they could protect themselves while supporting their peers?
That's such a good question. I think there's a perception that it's hard to know your rights. And there's great organizations like Know Your Nine, I Have a Right To, that are doing the good work of letting people know it's not that hard. And maybe with new forms of technology, Chat GPT and things, you can find them a lot more easily. Um, 9 times out of 10, when people come to me with a problem with the criminal justice system, they don't know that there's statutory and even sometimes constitutional victims' rights in their state. So whenever you're facing a problem, there's local laws, there's state laws, there's federal laws. And ideally, you can find an advocacy organization that can give you information about your rights and you can learn them quickly, and hopefully turn around and educate your peers. Because if you didn't know, that means probably most people in your community didn't know, and you can become someone who creates awareness. Once you know your rights, the challenge, right, is enforcement. Enforcement doesn't have to be through a legal process. It doesn't have to cost you money and require an attorney. It doesn't have to take years of your life. I have used the media for enforcement more than I have used anything else. And with social media, people can do petitions and campaigns that move people. So we still function as a moral society. Moral outrage goes a long way to changing things that the law does not. I'm thinking very quickly of a case I had in Arkansas where it represented a survivor against an Olympic athlete. He was found responsible to have committed the offense, and then the school delayed his expulsion to after his graduation. Riddle me that one. And we appealed and we threatened lawsuits. They did not care. Took one call to a journalist, one story in the paper, and all of a sudden it was a mistake. And he was immediately expelled. It was never a mistake. I can tell you that from working on the inside. It was intentional. But the minute the public knew, all of a sudden they're like, we can't pull this off. So there are many ways to enforce your rights. There's not just one. Get creative.
For young people who are thinking about pursuing law school or one day running for office, what advice would you offer them as they start on that path?
Oh, I have my assessment for folks. It's very simple. One, do you like to read for hours? If you say no, don't go to law school. Do you like to write for hours? No, don't go to law school. And the last one, which is the most important one, do you know why you want the degree? If you don't know, if you just think you'd be good at it, if you like the challenge, it's not for you. But if you know exactly what you're going to do with it, you will make it through what is a very intentionally grueling process that will shape you into the advocate you need to be. I have never been more stressed. I have never worked more hours. I have never probably been in a worse mental health state, but I knew every single day what I was fighting for in the end. And it has served me my entire career. So when you hold on to your purpose, you can move mountains. But we do need more lawyers. You don't have to be prosecutors or even plaintiffs' attorneys like me. You can go be legislative policy. You can be judges. You can be law enforcement. There are so many ways to use that degree. But it gives you a baseline knowledge and a structure for thinking that will serve you well. And the amount of times I say something someone else does, but because I say I'm a lawyer before it, people get scared and they pay attention to you in a different way. So it gives you a power that you have responsibility to use well.
I agree completely, Laura, with everything you've said, given that I also went through law school as well. Something that came to mind when you were saying that, I really believe that lawyers and really anybody who's going to be a lawmaker should have trauma-informed lawyering, or just be trauma informed in general. I'd love to hear your perspective on that. You've talked a lot throughout our conversation today about how your personal experience has shaped so much of how you perceive things, how you advocate, how you stand for survivors. Um, and I think that if there was more understanding of trauma and how to work with survivors of trauma, we would have a much better world. So I'd love to just hear your perspective on that.
That's a really good point. I think my experience being a survivor and starting with advocacy and working with advocacy organizations gave me that trauma-informed training, and I almost take it for granted because it wasn't part of my formal legal education. There's very little formal legal education around victims' rights work at all. Those who go to law school will know there's exactly one day and one day only that you spend on rape law. Everyone hates that day for a variety of reasons, and mostly because the law is quite horrible and there will be some fight in the classroom over it at that point. And that's not nearly enough. It doesn't touch on victims' rights, doesn't touch on trauma-informed care and approach. I would say, litigation training to a degree was helpful. It's more about how juries perceive you, how to break things down simply. But specialized trauma-informed training, I know the National Crime Victim Bar Association and other organizations offer this training. So absolutely worth getting, because what we sometimes forget when we get to a certain level of professional career is, one, people are not comfortable in the settings that we are, that they don't have the knowledge and the vocabulary that we do. But two, we can get jaded to the horrors that we hear, and intentionally or not, we can be unkind in our efforts to move through a busy work week in wanting to quickly get the fact that we need to make our assessment. And so I found that being a survivor helped me ground in really listening to survivors. So in my intakes, I set the stage and I say, I'm going to let you share your story, start wherever you want. I'm not going to interrupt you. Go all the way through it and you tell me when you're done. And only then do I go back and ask questions. And I'm very mindful anytime I have to ask a question that can be emotionally upsetting, I first say why. And I say, if I ever ask you something and you don't know why I'm asking and it's upsetting, ask me why I am, but I'll always try to tell you. And so I'm like, I'm asking if you've ever accused someone before, not because of anything about you. I'm just wondering if the defendant is going to bring this up. And I need to know it now so I can best protect you and prepare for that scenario. So whatever the challenging question is, I try to give context so people know it's not coming from a place of shame, judgment, or anything else. It really is, I'm here having your back. The other side's going to come in swinging, so I need to know how to block that swing by knowing it's coming in the first place, because no survivor has a perfect story. And I think the thing I've said more times than I can count in intakes is, when people show that they are ashamed, that they feel responsible when it was not their fault, I always say, you can't know that sexual violence is going to happen to you. How many times have you gone over to a friend's house and you've been perfectly fine, right? Like, we don't live in a world where we're worried about being attacked every day, and we don't want to live in that world anyways. So you're not responsible. And I think what's made me so effective in my advocacy is that trauma-informed training actually goes into the language I use. So rather than centering survivors as the source of the action, I actually center perpetrators, which may seem counterintuitive, but Jackson Katz does it well. As a lot of people said, she was raped, which erases the offender. We need to say he raped her. And I'm using gender norms there, obviously. But I took that to heart. Everything is about the offender. He got the alcohol. He cornered her in the room. He locked the door. He. And so it puts the focus where it belongs and off of the survivor. And I'm educating the adjudicators at the same time that I'm arguing these cases. And I bring in experts to explain trauma-informed behavior when maybe they reacted in a way the public would show judgment? Why did you go back and talk to that offender the next day? And then we bring in that expert. This is common. They had a pre-existing relationship. Most survivors are invested in keeping the relationship. They don't want to bring complaints. They don't want to access a system. They want the harm to go away. And restorative justice is a valid model, right? So we figure out ways to really educate the people that are adjudicating these cases using the same kind of trauma-informed understanding that we use in dealing with the survivors.
I think one of the most interesting parts of my story or most pivotal parts of my story happened when the detective who asked me questions and did my intake when after I received my rape kit and was talking to the police, had just come back from a trauma-informed training, and I believe it was with you. Um, and it was something that, obviously changed the course of my life as a survivor and then as a human being because of the way that I was treated in that very moment, in a moment when I really needed that sort of support and freedom to share what I had experienced without that judgment of those pointed questions that can often feel victim blaming. Um, so that was like a little hope moment in my story. And I was wondering if there's any little hope moments right now that are happening in this garbage dumpster fire of a world that we are experiencing right now. But something that you could highlight that's giving you hope and keeping you moving forward in the work that you're doing, either in your advocacy, in your life, in politics.
Yeah. My hope is coming from who is running for Congress. I had the pleasure of going to Renaissance Weekend, which is an invite-only opportunity. It's heads of government, heads of company, top artists, I mean, you name it. And I met two other people running for Congress right now. And one is not only a reverend, but a rocket scientist, Dr. Chris Jones in Arkansas, which is a very red state that he is working very hard to make blue. Another was Colonel Bree Fram, a transgender military service member who has done amazing service for our country but got pushed out by Donald Trump, and whose family very much supports her in her fight for justice. And so I'm seeing the right leaders step up for the first time. It's not just the wealthy and the person who got in line and waited their turn. It's people who are like, none of this nonsense. And what has been really beautiful and truly unexpected running for office is the more I just am myself, the more people are there. I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to stand up and everyone's going to critique, oh, you didn't do your hair, you didn't do your makeup, you didn't say the right thing. And you're like, everyone attacks you in politics. But we are in a place where people are hungry for authentic human beings that will not tolerate what they see in the news and on TV, and they are tired of looking at Congress and seeing nothing happen. And a lot of us are younger. I'm on the older end. I'm 40, but I've seen 25, 27, 32, 34. It is a younger generation. So politics may not be what everyone is called to, but I do think now more than ever, all of us should play some part, whether you're door knocking, contributing $5, or deciding to run yourself, even if it's just for school board. These things matter. I think the hardest part of my journey to where I am is realizing I had to be the hero that I needed. I didn't have one. There wasn't a Laura Dunn at my side during a criminal case. I didn't even get a criminal case. So I have tried to be what I didn't have. And so when we see something that is wrong, try to be the answer to that problem.
And you've been that for me and for so many people. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Since I Have the Right To is all about empowering young people and survivors, we'd love for you to share your own statement. How would you finish the sentence, I have the right to? And what does that mean for you personally?
Oh, there's so many answers. I'm trying to think of my favorite one. What's coming to me is I have the right to fight back. What I've seen with younger generations, because they're being systematically disempowered, whether it is graduating college and not having any entry-level jobs yet, whether it is such heightened financial conditions they can't afford to live on their own and they're stuck in their parents' care, you have the right to stand up. I've had people come up to me and say they're younger and they're interested, and they're like, how do I get my parents to agree? And I was like, I don't think I've ever asked for permission once in my life. I'm a big believer in beg for forgiveness rather than asking for permission. So I think we have the right to fight back in whatever way that looks like for you, because joy is resistance. Beauty in a world of darkness is resistance. You have to decide how you want to fight back, and don't underestimate those small things. Like, I go to Broadway plays once a month, and I'm normally bawling, and I take away an encouragement that the world can be more beautiful. I just saw Harry Potter, The Cursed Child, and there's a whole scene where the world has been taken over by a force of darkness, and there is resistance in those moments, and it very much echoed what is happening in the US. So every person has a way to fight back, and it can be as beautiful or as tenacious as you would like it to be. Whatever is authentic to you, that is your gift to the world.
That is the perfect ending, closing sentiment. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your insights, experiences, and hopes for the future, and just your overall wisdom with us and our listeners.
Absolutely. And a huge
Thank
thank you
you.
to our amazing student co-hosts, Jonas and Kyleigh, for joining us and bringing your perspectives into this conversation. It really makes Aspire what it is.
Laura, we're wishing you the very best as you continue your campaign and all the work you're doing to create safer communities and support survivors everywhere.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Remembering education, advocacy, and courage are all part of creating change, and each of us has the power to make a difference. We'll see you next time on Aspire. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at IHaveTheRightTo.org.